getting the results of a project out there to those who need to know, not only your fellow researchers, but also others. And then after that, have a look at actual projects. And I have 5, 6 examples of projects in different fields, and to show what are the elements that are being judged and that you need to include in a project, not as a recipe, from this is the way to do it, but to give you the thought from how does an evaluator look at your project, what are the successful factors and which elements are less important. Okay, let's go down to the finance. We all know that budgets are a little bit like this. Usually vague, because research is not something like building a house. If you build a house, you have a project, you know exactly the timeline, you know the price of the bricks, or you can negotiate the price of the bricks, and the roof and the windows and the masonry. So those are more or less within reasonable terms. You know exactly what. You know how long it takes to put that roof on the house. So there's less risk there. And the risk is really whether people actually perform, whether they actually deliver the materials, whether they actually put the materials together in time. But in research, on top of that, you have the uncertainty of going into unknown territory. That is why it's called research. No? And that is something that is always in contrast to what administration would like to see, because administration, and I just pick one group, accountants, they love to be extremely exact, precise, monitor everything. And in research, you don't know upfront what you need to have. There's a wild uncertainty there. So yes, there are ways to sort of guess what a good and reasonable budget would be, but management has to allow, and administration too, has to allow a certain level of uncertainty. So the way this is designed for by the European Commission, and many other funding agencies have a similar scheme. Some are different, so please be aware of the differences. But the European Commission has a scheme in general. You design a budget that is as closely related to your activity plan. You explain how you arrive at that budget, and we will come back into that in a second. And then you get an upfront payment to play with. You report what you've actually used out of that portfolio, and then at the end you get plus or minus the rest. So it's an ongoing reporting back and forth. And you get some money up front, but not enough to do everything. Some funding agencies have a very different policy there. You need to describe in detail up front what you're going to do, down to every single computer that you want to achieve, exact prices. You get the money there, and you cannot divert. So the European Commission budgets for research are much more flexible. You can change between categories, between equipment and salary. You can change from one year to another if you argue why. You need to justify and explain why you make changes, but it's possible to make changes. And that makes the program rather attractive at the level of financial management. It makes more headaches for your local administration, though. And we will come back in that a minute. As I said, the cost categories are usually done in 2 different categories. The categories related to your actual research and demonstration activities in the laboratory or in the field. And this can be desk research, of course, or laboratory research, or clinical research. And that is described in the work packages. Some activities for communication, like a specific conference, not a general dissemination conference, but a specific conference on specific work topics, they can be part of this activity too. And setting up a website for specific purposes. For example, a website to share actual research data and organize meetings. And management-related activities are rather the communication throughout the consortium, the communication to other stakeholders, the specific reporting to the European Commission. So you need time to write these reports, especially the final report. You need to stop your activities close to the end of the project period, but keep some time allocated to write the final reports, because that's a lot of work. And of course, intermediary meetings. Those are all related to the management-related activities. And it depends on the call. Some calls give a limit here. They say 7% of these activities, or 7% of the total project cost, can be allocated to management. Some other calls, they allow a higher percentage, 20-25%, if that is really needed and justified. So it depends on the call whether you're allowed to allocate more to management or not. Then how do you justify? Try to be precise and short in your proposal, but focus in on the key elements that are really important in your budget, not on the minor details. To give an example here, in this one proposal where we were working with HIV vaccines, the vaccines are DNA-based, so not antibodies. And in the work program, we said, okay, we are going to allocate 350,000 euros for the DNA. And any evaluator, if they see that in the budget, without explanation, they will say, are you crazy? We have a DNA synthesizer here and can do this for $10 or $20, not for 350,000 euro. But in that particular project, we explained, no, we need GMP quality. That means it's sterile, it can be used and injected and used inside patients. That is extremely expensive DNA. So the grade of the quality of the DNA determines the price in this case. And we have individual quotes, blah, blah, so we know that this is not an outrageous sum of money. And then the evaluator says, okay, that explains. You don't have to do that for every single euro in the budget, but for the main cost items that are unusual, and also for the costs that are in the budget, but that are not paid by the European Commission. As you will see, you'll get co-funding, so you have to contribute part of the budget yourself sometimes, and that can be, instead of cash, can be in contributions in kind. Explain the access to the facilities that you bring into the project, that you do not charge to your partners. Well, otherwise, normally, if an industry partner would come in, they would be charged with a sum to use your facilities. Explain the type of salaries that are working on the project, people on the project, but are not paid by the European Commission, but paid by, for example, the time your dean spends on the project meeting, if it's his or her topic. The time your secretaries or legal counsel spends on preparing the project and in the project, the contracts. Those are salaries that are working in the budget on the project, but they're not paid by the Commission, and they are called contribution in kind. So your co-funding is not necessarily cash from your account, and I will come back to that in an example later. And then resources, I said, is not just finance, but also descriptions of your partners. And that means that you have a very short paragraph, like this is the description of my company in one of the training programs, the training projects. Not more than this. As you might have seen in the previous slides, my company does much more than this. But in this particular project, that is the relevant information, and that's all that is needed. So tailor your description to the scope of activities in your project. So that helps the evaluator to understand what your role is and see whether your piece of the puzzle is complementary or not. As I said, for the research projects, we are talking about co-funding. For the people exchange projects and the cooperation and support actions, they're 100% funded, so there you don't have to worry. But for the larger research projects, all of them are co-funded, and the good news is that the co-funding is quite substantial. Small medium enterprises are treated as if they were universities. In this case, that is to help them. 75% of the research activities in the laboratories or in the field are covered. And the training and the management costs, let me see, where's the management costs? That's part of this here, are funded 100%. Demonstration activities like a pilot plant or a pilot study in an industry is closer to the market, and it's usually done by industries, larger companies, and they get only 50% of the cost. Other activities and training, they're funded 100%. So it's quite generous actually compared to some of the other projects. Other activities can be dissemination activities, for example. Dissemination, if you have a final conference in a project and you need to engage a lot of stakeholders in a large region or address many countries to learn about your new results, that is dissemination, and that will be funded 100%. Or training people. Training can be part of other as well, depending on what kind of training you're delivering. Now, of course, you may wonder, 75%, I still don't have the 25% left. Where do I get that? Now, it depends on your cost model. And cost model is something, I don't know, how many people are familiar with cost models in Europe? Nobody dares. I guess so. It's a technical term that describes how you administer and account for the costs in your organization. Because in these projects you follow your own rules, not the rules of the European Commission for accounting. And I will come back to this one just in a minute. I first go to this one. The cost models determine whether you account for all the costs of the university in one account, which is usually the case, or whether you have the possibility to open specific accounts for each individual project. That makes a big difference. And the second thing is, how do you account for indirect costs? Now, what are indirect costs? Indirect costs are any costs that are not direct costs. And this... Sorry, just to tease you. Just to tease. Direct costs are all personnel that are working on the project. So not everybody in the university, but everybody in the university is actually allocated to this project. And that can be on a percentage base. So for example, your dean might spend 10% of his or her time on the project. Scientific personnel in the laboratory might spend 100%, and a project manager might spend 25% of his time. So that is done, 25% of his salary goes into the cost for salary during the years that the project is active. If you're active only in the first year of the project, you can bring in only the cost of the first year. So it's real cost basis, actual expenses. The good news is that this is not net salary, but it's the institute's borne cost for personnel. So it's net salary plus taxes plus social security, pension, whatever, the whole package that is paid by the university to its staff member. The full cost there. Then you have the working expenses, consumables in the laboratory, or the actual working expenses if you have field trips to a car to go out in the field. Then you have any equipment that you need to have, small equipment according to the rules in your university. Maybe up to, say, 3,000 euro or so are not depreciated. They're brought into the project and immediately brought into that reporting period. Large equipment are depreciated over the number of years according to the rules in your university. As a rule of thumb, laboratory equipment is depreciated over 3 years. Large laboratory equipment is appreciated over 5 to 10 years. And then I'm talking about really large centrifuges or large NMR facility, tomographs. I don't know whether that is applicable here, but that is the rule in your university. You make your own rule there. If the rule doesn't exist, talk to the administrator and you make up a rule. Travel is usually separate there on the direct cost. And travel means either you bring in the actual expenses with the tickets, or you establish a rule, you say, no, just per diem rates or flights plus hotel or per diem rates, and you follow a table that is published by your government. You follow your own rules there. Again, if there are no rules, you establish a rule yourself, internal. You don't need to follow European rules here. The only trick is that you keep it consistent. If you have two projects from the European Commission, they need to follow the same rule. You do not have to send all these tickets to the European Commission. You keep them in-house. And at the end of the project, you're being audited by your own auditor, which is either in-house or external, and they do not audit the whole organization, but they audit the project costs. So keep copies of all the expenses in a separate folder in your laboratory. That's good practice, because otherwise they get lost in the finances of the whole university. Keep all the expenses in a separate folder. If the auditor comes in, at the end of the day, they can see all the salary costs on a monthly basis. They see the timesheets. I will come back to that in a minute. They see all the travel expenses, tickets, and they see the other expenses here. And the reports, all in one folder. And that's easy for them to judge, and then they just ask questions whether actual costs were real in the accounting system of the university. That way limits your costs for the auditor. And you can have a student assembling all these things, and they learn about costing and administration along the way. That's what I did. Involve the students and young scientists in tasks in the project, and the young scientists to write the reports. That saves you time and it gives them training. The cost for these students and the young scientists can be borne in the project. So it's not a free activity, that they can be judged. Then these direct costs together, you actually had, sorry, I'm getting tired here. On top of that, you have indirect costs, and those are all the costs that are paid by the university to allow you to do research. The cost of establishing the laboratory, establishing the library, paying for the electricity bill, the water, the sanitation, the secretary, the lawyer, all the people that are not working in the laboratory, but are still contributing to the environment of the laboratory to do work. That is usually 10–20% of the cost of a project. Sometimes it can be more. If you have specific equipment or very expensive infrastructure, it can be up to 60 or 70%. If you don't have a means to calculate those indirect costs and allocate them to the project, then you can use a flat fee of 60% overhead costs by the European Commission that is allowed to do that. If your accounting system would be able to distinguish the individual indirect costs and allocate them to a project, you can use your actual overhead rate. But most universities, I would guess all of them, even in my company, I used a flat rate of 60% of these costs. And then you add them together and you get 75% subsidy. Subcontracting is always kept differently. Subcontracting are for contractors, companies, other parties that are working for you, are paid by an invoice, and they do not give rise to any indirect costs. So those are separate. And that determines your total EC funding. Now, to calculate this as an example, if you have 100,000 CFAs in the laboratory, plus you have flat rate indirect costs of 60,000 CFAs, your actual total cost of the university for this project will be 160,000 CFAs. You get subsidies of 75% from the European Commission. That means that you actually end up 120,000 CFAs of your laboratory costs. You see, no cash out of an account here. That's the good news. And your management expenses will be funded 100% times the overhead. So you actually end up with quite some cash. That is the good news about all this. The contributions in kind and the overhead or indirect cost can actually cover some of the extra expenses. Now, the bad news is that you will really need that money because of, because of something that I will tell you in a minute. Let me go back to the Excel sheet to show you an actual example of a budget before we go on, because otherwise we lose the track here. This is an actual example of a budget of one of the larger projects. Well, not large project. We are talking about here €1.5 million funding for a project cost of 1.7 million. So actually this is much more than 75% funding. These are the number of partners involved, 11 partners. These are the RTD activities. And you see, as I explained, you have personnel costs, travel costs, other specific costs, equipments, and overheads. So if you have a table like this, already it makes it much more transparent to work with. And actually, I can leave this template with you here, so you can actually start from here in an Excel sheet and modify this according to your needs. You just change the names of the partners, you add in lines as you see needed, and then it automatically calculates because each of these have their own formula behind. Now, how is this summary table calculated automatically? Simple. First, we have a sheet here, assumptions, and there for each partner, we describe their salary costs and their cost model. And you see most of them are additional cost model, which is called, so they have a flat rate, either 20% or 60%. Then we have the cost per flight for travel from Europe to Latin America in this case, or within Europe, and that is an estimate. The actual cost will be different, of course, but we use this as an estimate to derive at a budget. Then we fill in personnel cost for each individual partner here, and for each work package. These are the work packages. So you see this lead partner, which is the coordinator, has 6 person months in this work package, has 4 person months in this work package, etc. And then the number of person months are summed up and calculated times the salary cost per month. And that gives you the actual cost in salaries for this work package for this partner. And the fun thing about this table is with the formulas is that you can change it whatever you like. You can really set up a sheet this way and then model and change parameters until you get your final budget right and the budget between the partners right. And that is a fantastic tool to play with. And now this is a rather complicated one with 11 partners and multiple work packages, but if you eliminate a number of them, you make life much more easy for the simpler, smaller projects. You can go as detailed as you like. And then we have another sheet here. Where is it? Come. For travel. Again, for each partner, you calculate how many field trips. You say, okay, field trip costs 6,000 euros in this case. A meeting costs 800. Subtotal is this much for this work package. And in another work package, we actually do not have field trips, but 5 workshops, so we calculate this. And then you fill in the whole sheet, and you ask your partners to fill in their table columns as well. And all of them are linked into, you see here, they're linked to the other sheets. So the summary table, if you set it up right, and you make some cross checks that the summary and the links are correct, the summary table automatically recalculates. You change something in the smaller fields because all of a sudden you have different personnel cost or you have an extra travel flight, then the total changes automatically with it. And this is not only useful for preparing a budget, because in your proposal only this table goes, not all the other details. You just copy this table into your proposal and that's sufficient for the evaluator. But you can use this in the negotiations if they have budget cuts. Then you cut some of the costs here and then you automatically adjust in the summary table. And you can use the same budget tool during the project to manage your finances. So I found it very useful and flexible, and I leave the Excel sheet with you unprotected so you can use it for your own purposes. And please share that. There's no intellectual property on this. This is our contribution into the project. So having said that, if you have more detailed questions here, just ask me later. But personally, I found it a very useful tool. So I'll leave it open then, and we go back to the sheet. And we discuss some of the wider issues. And again, this is not just unique for the European Commission. You can use this for any other funding body as well, and tailor it to the requirements of that specific funding agency. Now, there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind, because these are the problems that always occur and occur again. One of them is indeed, indeed, what are the requirements of that particular agency, in this case the European Commission? What are the advance payments? And I will show you in a minute where the problem could be. Distribution of payments and delayed final payments. Be prepared that the final payment on a project might be half a year or maybe even more than that coming in. And that means that your university needs to pre-finance the last part of the project. And you need to be prepared for that and discuss with your accounting department how to do that. Indirect costing I explained already, and that can really help with some of those problems, but it also is really an area of open debate usually. Fortunately, there's help, and I will show you in a minute how. And value-added tax issues, because value-added tax are not eligible for the European Commission. So you cannot bring them into the budget for the subsidies for Europe. They may be eligible for other funding agencies, but not for the Framework 7 programs. So any losses here, if you still have to pay value-added taxes on, say, a centrifuge or a car that you need to buy, should be borne into the indirect costs. And that's exactly why I said there is also a negative message. You may lose some by cost that you have to pay by law. But unfortunately, you cannot bring into the budgets from the European Commission. Usually, there's enough flexibility there, but because only on a few costs you will have to pay VAT, and it's very important to have at least indirect costing of 10-20% on your projects to have enough flexibility. The other category that is usually giving a lot of trouble, which is not allowed to bring into the costs, are exchange losses. If you have euros that have been fixed by the European Commission into the grant, and by the time you actually receive money and transfer it into the currency, at the end of the project, the currency exchange rate may be completely different. And I had a very painful example in Argentina at the time when there was a financial crisis, where somebody lost 60% of their budget between the contract and the end of the project. That was extremely painful. And there was nothing to do about it because it was illegal to bring those costs into the European project. Very, very painful. So be aware of them. If you have the possibility to open a Euro account here in Cameroon, either at your university or at an affiliated organization, that would shield and guard you against that. The other thing is there, you will see that in the financial guidelines which you can download, so what I'm telling you is not secret, but just be aware of it. Profits. If the exact exchange rate would rise, if you invest it in a bank and you get revenues and interests, they should be rolled back into the project as a benefit. So you cannot just earn money out of it. No casino trips with European subsidies, huh? But no casino trips. Other projects that are problems that are occurring are reporting, timesheets. This is not to report to the European Commission, but to report to your auditor. The auditor will ask you timesheets that are signed off each month or each 3 months by the supervisor of the people who work on the project. So they can be detailed, that is up to you, as long as the auditor accepts the time records, that how many people are there and whether there is a match between the time that they work and the cost on the salaries that you claim. That will be important to agree with your own auditor. You do not need send that to the European Commission. The only thing that you send to the European Commission, or rather the coordinator, is the one-sheet summary, and that's a special form, part of the forms, Form C, where you only report your total costs in that reporting period. Just one sum. And it's very simple reporting to the coordinator. But internally, you have to convince your auditor that you have done everything right and correct. Then, of course, sometimes there are problems with visa. I was happy to learn that here in Cameroon, people are very welcomed, and it's rather relatively easy to get visa to people, either to travel outside or to come here. But some other countries, specifically in the former Soviet Union, it's extremely difficult, extremely difficult. So it takes time and effort, and sometimes it takes half a year to actually get somebody in the laboratory, and you lose that half year. So be aware of that. Fortunately, there are help desk services that are free, and many of the questions that I said and many others that you may encounter are already encountered by other people. So the frequent asked questions sections has a lot of advice and solutions. And you don't have to pay me. You go there, you get the information free. If you can't find the information there, you don't pay me because I'm partner in the project. You can still ask the question to me. But after this project, be aware that this is there, and you ask your local research management offices to help you get out of those problems, because you need to get to build up that experience. We have a frequent asked questions database in our own company, which I hope at the end of this project we might be able to bring online, but that is not ready yet. And what I said about reporting, I think, yeah, usually you have costs related to the proposal design and writing. Those are not eligible. So you have to invest time and effort to write a proposal, take the risk that it will not be funded, try again later, etc. The moment that your contract has been negotiated, and you may need some time, and maybe sometimes travel for that as well, until the contract is signed, then the actual project cost can be borne into. And then, of course, you have the final report, and before you get your final payment, it will take some time. So you have costs here before the start of contract, and you have costs here before you get your final payment after acceptance of the final report, where you need some buffer. And it may be very difficult for your university to cover that buffer unless you have another project running in parallel, like I have in my company. It's a very small company, so I cover those things by having another project that is starting here, and I use the advance payment to cover the cash flow. But be aware of the cash flow. Your government might have funds to help. Many countries have small discretionary funds to help with the travel here, and sometimes with this to cover. I know that other companies and universities sometimes take a temporary loan for this, if it's a significant amount of money. So be aware of it and try to find a solution yourself there. Also know that you get an advance payment, which is usually for the research projects, that is 80% of the costs for the first 1.5 years. And then you send in your report of the first year, and it takes a bit of time before you get your next advance payment. So plan ahead. When you buy your equipment and pay your salaries, try to do that here and there, and not here. Okay, suppose you have submitted and you evaluated evaluation itself. Submission is, as I said, online. Before doing that, I urge you, every one of you who considers to propose is free to register on this link. And if you get the presentation, you will see that this is an active link. If you type in this in Google, you will find the link immediately as well. You fill in a standard form, and then you get an email back from the Commission that your institute is registered, and every time when you propose a proposal, then all the forms are filled in automatically already. Saves you a lot of time and confusion. However, be aware, it should be the university or the institute who registers, not the individual principal investigator. And again, this is a reason for a research management office to do that, because otherwise you have 2 or 3 principal investigators filling in different elements in the forms. That can be highly confusing. Also, you get a number, a personal identification code for the university, not the principal investigator, that is linked to the legal representative, which is usually the vice-chancellor, is the one who signs the contract. Be careful that you designate only one person for the legal entity. One person signs all the contracts for the whole university, not the principal investigator. Okay? And I will come back to that later, because it's the university who signs the contracts. The university owns the intellectual property, usually, And at least the university has to administer the money and distributes the money to the laboratories and the researchers, not the principal investigator. The only exception are the people exchange programs. Those can be individual grants. All the other programs is university-based. That means that the university needs to deal with it and has the responsibility to deal with it. Okay, back to the evaluation. The process is a proposal will be checked for eligibility first, and they see, are all the forms filled in? Are there sufficient partners above the threshold of 3 in different countries? And is the money not too big? Is the limit for a call 3 million? You cannot ask for 3,100,000 euros. So they check administrative eligibility. And there are always proposals that do not fit, because somebody has filled in the forms not correctly, forgot an email, or forgot to check the budget. So please have somebody in the coordinator's position double check that. And check your own data. Make sure that they're correct. They can be followed online, so it's not sending papers, but do check that. Usually 5 or 10% of all the proposals fail there, and they're not even judged by the experts. Then you have the Commission sends the proposals electronically to a number of experts, and each of these experts, they judge a huge pile of these proposals individually, write an individual report that is sent back to the European Commission. Then the European Commission invites the evaluators to Brussels, and you can be an expert too. I have in the package a web link where you can describe your own field, your own expertise, and you can be invited by the Commission as an expert. They pay you the flight tickets and €450 per day to sit in Europe to judge proposals from others. So that is a very valuable training course that you should follow after my training course here, because that is real practice, and you build up a network of other experts. And I've already written proposals because I met another expert who was working in my field and said, that's good, let's join each other and write a proposal. So I highly encourage people to subscribe in the expert database. The Commission is actually asking for experts from third countries, Latin America, Africa, because there are very few experts there. So you might have a good chance there. The Commission then is inviting these experts to Brussels, and they actually discuss. They do not write reports again, but they discuss each other's reports. And those are heavy discussions, I can assure you, because experts have different views on the proposals. And you may have a proposal that is judged very highly by one expert, and another expert says, no, this is bullshit. I've seen another proposal and they've just duplicated, this has been done, it should not be funded. And you get huge discussions between the experts, and they need to write a consensus score. Consensus among the experts that they all agree, okay, this is a fair score for this particular proposal. And that consensus report is then sent back to you, where you can see. And they need to write the arguments exactly why they give you this score. And that is very helpful, because if you fail, you can improve your next proposal that way. Or decide not to propose to the European Commission, but to the World Bank or another agency. Then the European Commission gives a ranking, and only the top 20% proposals, they are being invited for negotiation. And all the others are rejected here with the report of justification. In between, there is sometimes, if necessary, an ethical review. So even if you have a good proposal here, top ranking, and there's a real ethical problem, it may be denied. That was the reason why I said pay attention to that. This is the website where you can register as an expert, and there's no limitation except that there is a final date, because that is the last date of this framework program. Those who have registered will be automatically invited as experts after that. And it's up to the European Commission to invite you. So you can propose, but wait until you're being invited. As long as you describe your expertise as broadly as possible, you have a better chance to be invited in the different areas on which you're expert. Then this I presented already, the evaluation criteria, and then, as I said, there's the rejected proposals. The majority of them, unfortunately, because there's never enough budget to fund everybody. And the ones that are selected for negotiation, sometimes there's a problem during the negotiation. If a partner walks out, an industry says, I'm not interested anymore, there are budget cuts that are not acceptable by the partners. It does happen sometimes. Rarely, but it does happen. And then the next best proposals are kept on a reserve list. So if you do not hear for a long time from your coordinator, ask him to investigate whether you're on the reserve list. Chances are not very high, but at least you know you have been judged as one of the top proposals and that you have a very good chance. That is valuable too. But it's very frustrating. I've had one proposal on the reserve list once and it was not funded, but it was extremely frustrating. It was an excellent proposal and I say, there was not enough money for it. Then you get into the negotiation and you receive from your coordinator a number of contract documents. Just have a look at the grant agreement itself is just 2 pages. It only says the European Commission recognizes this consortium as valuable. This is the starting date of the project. It will run for 3 years and will receive so much money. There's nothing more in the contract than that. All the technical details, what you want to do, are in the Annex 1. And during the negotiation, you will be able to change that Annex 1 until both the European Commission and the consortium are in line. So sometimes the Commission asks for a budget cut here in a category and then you need to reshuffle. Sometimes you have other activities that need to be reshuffled. Minor changes can be done there. Not a complete overhaul of the proposal, of course. But minor distributions between partners can still be negotiated. Annex 2 is important to have a look already. You get model agreements on the internet here on how the Annex 2 normally looks like. It will be tailored to the project, but that contains all the financial regulations and the legal stuff and the intellectual property. So have a read together with your legal counsel or whoever is responsible on this and with your accounting department for the financials. And then there may be other annexes for specific programs. So all of this can be downloaded from this website, including the audit certificates and the reporting guidelines, so you know upfront, in full transparency, what to expect. The coordinator is the one who is responsible for this, but it's good practice if you know why the coordinator is asking you certain documents, and that you know what is the quality to deliver. So in our RIMI for AC project, what happened, we had the negotiations here finalized mid-October, and then contract signatures. Actually, this was really, really fast. So the starting date, well, this is an error. This is an old slide. Actually, the starting date was in December. Then we have the structure annex, which contained all the details what we were, and then finally we could actually start, and the real work could start. Partnership agreements generally between partners are important if you're working in research development, especially if you work with things that relate to intellectual property. So good practice in the slightly larger consortia is to have a partnership or consortium agreement. And there you have special arrangements between partners. So even though the European Commission will not impose any rules on you, how to deal with material transfer and knowledge, you can agree specific arrangements between the partners in a partnership agreement. And there you can make specific things like technical roles and responsibilities between the coordinator and the partner, or between partners, who is responsible for what in management and reporting, who gets which money and by when, and what happens if you don't perform, and the intellectual property rights and exploitation rights. And I will come to that in a second. Documents like this can be downloaded there. Negotiations with your partners can take time, so be prepared. Some partners are bullies, some partners are much more friendly and help you to guide, but be aware of your rights and make sure that it doesn't end up in a fight like this, because that is the worst possible situation, no? So getting into the intellectual property issues really give you just a glimpse of some of the main terms that you will encounter. I'm not teaching you here as a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer. But I've negotiated more than 400 contracts when I was Vice President Business Development in our company. So we've seen a lot of contracts failing because people don't understand the principles. So just a course 101 on intellectual property here in just 5 or 6 slides. Legal terms like background and foreground look very complicated, and these are the official definitions if you like. But really what it boils down to in everyday language is that background is the knowledge and the materials that you bring into the project. Stuff that you have developed and that you're willing to share with your partners. There are 2 ways of doing that. There is one way you say, okay, we share everything. That's possible. If you want to exclude certain things and just bring in specific knowledge, specific expertise and materials or databases or documentation, then you can describe it in a positive list and say, this is what will be available to our partners, and you put that in an annex to the contract. Or if it's too complicated, you can say, let's make up a negative list. For example, if a university has a contract with another project or an industry, and that is exclusive, so they cannot touch your material there because that is exclusive for those partners. Then you mention in a negative list, well, we are willing to share anything in our laboratory except that area. And that is a way to deal with it in a very transparent way. It's important because your partners need to know what they have access rights to the stuff that you are going to share. The idea of a project is to share the different ingredients of a cake and bake a cake together. No? Now, baking the cake is the foreground. That is the new knowledge that you develop jointly. For example, one laboratory has an assay, another laboratory has samples. You join the assay and the samples, you do the test, and you validate the assay with the samples in the test. Now, the validation of the test is new. That makes the test more valuable because you know in which cases it's really giving quality results. So that's valuable for both parties, and both parties should be able to benefit from that. Yes? Sorry, one more thing here, and that is something that many people don't realize. Intellectual property rights are a very broad area, not just patents. It's about copyrights, about design rights, about patent rights, of course, about plant variety rights, material rights, bacteria, fungi, you're working with plants, design rights or industrial trademarks. If you have designed a machine, engineering model, that industry model can be protected. So that's not a patent, but it describes the model. So have a lawyer instruct you whether, if your question mark about this, whether you should or can protect it, have a lawyer explain to you, and have maybe a student to look into the patent databases and the intellectual property databases and see whether somebody has protected it already. There's a second reason why it's a good practice to have a look in the patent databases. There's an enormous amount of information about projects and science and technology in these patent databases that is never published in the scientific literature. Because it's industrial design and industries or do research too, and they publish in the patent databases, but they're not interested in scientific publications. And you will be surprised, but the patent databases are much bigger than the scientific databases of, for example, scientific journals, medlines, those kind of things. They're much bigger. So don't forget that vast amount of information there. You would be surprised at the level of detail you can learn. You can even find partners there, because somebody who has deposited a patent or a model is interested in the field and in the market and may have very specific knowledge there. So if you see the inventor, you can call them up and see them. Would you like to be partner? A couple of things that might be necessary to discuss with your legal counsel, and that is, European Commission does not own the results of the projects, otherwise you would be subcontractor. You will be the owner of the results, but transfer of ownership, even on inclusive grounds, is possible. There's one thing to be aware. If in the partnership there is a multinational company, by default, the standard agreements allow the multinational company to use the rights in any of their subsidiaries. So if you have Monsanto, daughter company in South Africa, in your project, Monsanto worldwide will also have access to the transfer to the intellectual property. Now, be aware of that, because I had a project like that with the big company, not Monsanto, and the small medium enterprises who also wanted to bring the products to the market. And they were completely squeezed out by this big company. So there we negotiated a clause where we said only the local daughter company of that big company have the access rights. If they want to use it worldwide, they need to negotiate with the small medium enterprise. And then they can divide roles or payments or whatever, but they need to negotiate first in order to actually exploit. And then a final thing which is relevant for universities, access rights for use of research. I've seen universities signing a contract where they signed away all exploitation rights, including access rights and user rights, to a company. And then 2 years later, they found they were not even able to do research on their own products anymore. Now, that is a liability. So have your legal counsel make sure that you still have access rights to the result of the project after the project. And this has nothing to do with the European Commission. This is true for any project that you work with academic partners and industry partners. So this is a small table I made here to make sure that your legal counsel knows which questions to ask and which clauses are important in the grant. Unless you're a legal expert yourself, but usually the scientists and the principal investigators forget even to ask their legal counsel to look into this. So again, the European Commission will leave it up to the consortium, and it's up to you to defend your rights and ask for access rights and ownership. I can talk days about this. I will not do it today. One thing that is really important here is not only material transfer and quality control issues, but specifically confidentiality and lab records. Lab records for those materials, antibodies, DNAs, plants, bacteria, cells that are developed, you need to record who made the invention. Because if you later want to negotiate a license or a patent, you need to make sure that the inventor is the right inventor and gets a fair return. The other thing is confidentiality. If you work with something that could be patented, or if you work with industry who would like to patent your invention together with you, then you need to make sure that you keep your invention confidential until you've found out whether you can protect it. Now, some industry members may want to limit your freedom there and say, you first talk to me, get my permission, and maybe later next year I will tell you whether you can publish. Now, that is unreasonable. So, good practice is to negotiate a fixed term of, say, 6 to 8 weeks, where you first ask permission to your industry or your other university partners. If they do not act in the 6 or 8 weeks with protecting and depositing their patent, then you're free to publish. Now, publication, let's be fair. Publication means talking at a conference. Publication means a student taking your knowledge and talking in another country about it. So you have to have some kind of control over who publishes what. And even submitting an abstract is a publication in this case. If you submit an abstract, it's public, you cannot patent anymore. In the US, you still have 1 year grace period, but in Europe, it's finished, over. So that could greatly upset your industrial or other university partners, and it may limit your value. So it's good practice to think about it, talk about it, train your students and staff, also temporary staff, that there should be a process of disclosure in-house. It's very simple, but it has to be in place. Now, of course, if you're in the social humanities where patenting is not an issue, this may not be that relevant. I fully realize that. But at least consider and make a decision whether it's relevant or not. Okay, these are, again, help sources. Lambert Agreements is a website where within the Commonwealth you have very good practice of standard agreements and confidentiality agreements to be signed and exchanged. There are standard models that you can download for free. So that really helps to get a start. And this link provides you a link into the patent databases where you can start searching. And there is a consortium models that are available from here. So you have consortium agreements, standard agreements that you can start with and then modify. And have a look at this website. I explained a little bit yesterday. I have left a copy of the guidelines for working between academia and industry. So I will not dwell on it later more, but that gives a lot of good advice on negotiation. Really good advice on things to consider. And that is the free help desk for intellectual property issues, where you can ask questions in 6 languages, have a frequent asked database where you find many solutions to your problems that you might have. Okay, then briefly talk about dissemination, then we go to the final section of a number of projects. This is one project that was a success, and I just want to share that as a successful example of dissemination. What is meant with dissemination and reaching impact. This was funded under a program for SME associations. And the small medium enterprises here are in the textile industry. So these are small medium enterprises in Europe that do not have a research capacity. This may be relevant here in Africa too. You may have craft shops, small medium enterprises that cannot do research themselves. And they link those through an association to research technology performers like a research institute or a university, to find a common solution for all of them. So that is a way to link not just one industry, but a group of industries and solve a common problem. Now, this particular program has projects for 2 to 3 years and quite considerable amount of money. And interestingly enough, intellectual property ownership of the results are with the industry, not with the universities. But the universities get 100% paid for the expenses. So it's a nice way to do applied research for a common problem. Now, this particular project was a project with the European Space Agency, and the acronym was called Space2Tax. Now, you might think, what has the Space Agency to do with textile industry, small enterprises? Really, really strange combination. Now, this is a fantastic example of knowledge transfer, because this one sentence describes the problem, and the other sentence describes what the problem objective of the project is. In fact, you see in that 1-2 sentences, a lot of information is there. It's about an application that was developed by the European Space Agency to capture water and to clean water while on a mission to Mars. And obviously on Mars there's very little water, maybe a little bit. During the 1.5 years travel back and forth, you will need to be extremely conservative with your water. This is an extreme case. So they capture the water, they clean the water for drinking purposes and reuse. And they have developed a biomembrane that actually can clean 100% efficiency. 100%, really absolute. Now, this is extremely high tech, but of course nobody is going to Mars nowadays. So what do you do with it? And this project consortium actually found an application in the textile industry, because the textile industry has a huge burden in Europe of cleaning their wastewater. They're cleaning their textiles, their clothes with very toxic agents, colorants, that are bad for the environment. So if you can clean that water 100%, it's good for the environment. So that is the only technical stuff I will tell you about the project. The project itself described expected benefits, cost savings, sludge is the leftover after the wastewater treatment, and water and energy savings. The social benefits are that you create a market of 165 million euro per year, and they made an estimation, and this is quite good estimation actually, across the whole of Europe, But that takes a bit of time. Improve the quality of life, improve competitiveness of those small textile industries, because they don't have to pay for the environmental taxes and they save on money and water and energy. And oh yeah, by the way, you create a lot of jobs and you save some on the energy and the exhaust for the Kyoto treatment. So there's a whole package of outcomes that have nothing to do with the membrane alone. It has to do with this kind of organization of the project. The project was led by the Industrial Association. There's a small core group of textile industries that wanted to try and test out and give feedback whether the solution worked or not. And there was a group of universities and research universities, together with the Space Agency, to converted the biomembranes and made the production process. One of the SMEs actually was manufacturing, and they manufactured the biomembranes and sold it. So you created jobs and economic return. It did not stop there, because the association organized workshops to train all the other SMEs how beneficial this is. So they created the market in Europe. And many small business owners are not easy to convince. You have to convince, yes, this new technology is really good for you, and train them how to use it. And then they reached out to all the companies across Europe. They organized conferences and they disseminated to policy, to the scientific community, and because the transfer of these membranes might be used for other applications. And they told journalists and wide publications. So the wide public all of a sudden now is aware, to some extent, that there are solutions for the environment in this sector. That is dissemination. So a couple of slides really on dissemination strategies. Identify what you want to disseminate, who is the target group, how to disseminate, whether there are any confidential issues with it, and who is responsible for the dissemination. So you can actually have a partner who is responsible for the dissemination. Like in this project, the association is taking on that role. They are not only coordinator, but also disseminator. They do not do the research. And on metrics, in the final report, of course, you gather these metrics and you use that in the final report to demonstrate how you have created impact. Recommendations, as I said, think of these. Think of small things like designing a website with a corporate design. I have my logo of my company here, but there's also a logo soon of our project. There's the copyright message that this presentation belongs to the project, not to the company, but to the project. Things like that. If you do that consistently, you build up an image and you build up the benefit of the project, in this case, to the other stakeholders. Well, I talked about this already, corporate copyrights, if applicable. And there are several ways to transfer knowledge in a more general sense, not only to talk about things, but also to send people, exchange staff, to network, to give policy recommendations, and then, of course, the more commercialization. So transfer of knowledge is far more than just commercialization. And please keep that in mind if you do this in balance with your mission, because that will give you success. Then some misconceptions you can read yourself. I'll skip this one. The final 5 examples before we close down. I have 10 minutes and that's just about time. Actual examples of projects. To give you a flavor, what are the success factors? This actually was an industry case where we developed a platform with an exploitation potential for various markets. We had 5 academic groups and 3 SMEs working together. The university was an experienced coordinator, but they refused to agree on the exclusivity. Now, there you have a negotiation problem, no? Why? Because there were 3 SMEs and each wanted to have exclusivity in their own domain. And the coordinators refused to do this, and they said, no, this is public taxpayers' money, it should be free for all. Now, one of the SMEs actually was so white-hot mad that they walked away. And then they called me in to help with the negotiation. And actually, I was able to convince the university coordinator to take on a more realistic role. The reason was simply that they had a technology transfer office with a young manager there. He had never negotiated before. So he was overly protective and general, and he did not want to get into the commercialization path. So there are some challenges at transfer of knowledge from actual projects that can be learned and exchanged. And I really think that setting up a Central African Research Managers Association, we could have workshops on things like this and share examples so that people have some guidance here. But just be aware of these issues as a checklist. Also on liability, if there's risk, who is responsible for it, so that you know what are the terms in the negotiations. I'll skip this one, I'll skip that one, and then go to the actual examples. Many people, as I said yesterday, think of a linear way. An idea, you write a proposal, you get some money, then you transfer to industry who gets money from a bank or a fund, and then you develop a product that sells automatically to the market. Well, that's the nice theory in a textbook, but in real practice, if anything happens here, there, then all the knowledge and the value is in the waste basket. So fortunately, there are ways of capturing the value here without losing it if anything happens. Because many of us are all working in small little networks. And if you capture those networks and connect them in a joint project, then you have a much larger framework where people can work together and get new ideas. Not only commercial ideas, but also work together here and do more research and new research projects. So creating an environment around the research project is very critical for the next stage and the second and the third project. The second thing you need to take into account is the timing. By the time you have developed the product and when it actually reaches the market, that may be years from now, is there a market 5 or 10 years from now for that product? Or has somebody else already developed something else and then nobody is waiting for the solution anymore? And this is relevant particularly in healthcare research because of the long timeline. It takes 10 to 15 years to bring a medication to the patient. And the research phase is only 1 or 2 years, 3 years. And all the rest is the development. For ICT, this may be very short. So there, the competition is more fierce, but at least you're closer to the market. So don't be too early, like in this case, but certainly not be too late with your innovation. So you need to forecast years ahead. And you in the research are generating new ideas for new products and services. And then together with the industry, you build a prototype that sort of works, roughly, but it cannot be reproduced on a large scale. And it's usually not user-friendly. And then the actual prototype that can be sold on the market, that should be validated with a large group of patients or with a large group of users in many different countries. That is industry. We still need years to do this. And only then you can start with the market and selling your products. You don't have to do all that. Your role is probably here, maybe a little bit here. But if you understand the needs of the industry partners, then you understand why they are so pressed for time and money. And that helps in your negotiation. So there's a whole lot of stuff that we deal with in our company to help industry members to take that path, to bring knowledge to society. And I will give you a few examples, as I promised, how to do that in practice and how to grow those larger projects, because none of the larger projects are falling from heaven. They just grow like a plant over time. Now, this is an example of international mobility, and that's a very small project that started very close to your own background, probably. The idea was under the Marie Curie program. Remember, this was people exchange. We set up a project in chemical catalysts with 2 academic groups in 2 different countries, one in Ireland, one in the UK, and another one in Germany, and one SME in Ireland. And the idea was to invite 2 fellows from the 2 different countries to the company in Ireland, and do the other way around. Have an industrial fellow from that one company go to both of the academic fellows and swap places. The advantage there is that the academic fellows can do academic research in an industry environment, work with the industrial companies, colleagues, and really find better catalysts, find better products and design, bring academic knowledge in place in the industry. And the industrial fellow got back to the academia for a few weeks each, and they thought about how do we select good compounds? How do we select compounds that are matched to the market needs? How do we design things with our new software program that you don't have in the university? And he also brought project management skills and intellectual property skills into the university. So it was a real swap in 2 things. The value, the outcome, was not only a small consortium, that was a nucleus for a much larger consortium. Now they are applying for bigger EU grants. This whole project was less than €1 million for 3 years, but now they're applying for grants of 5-6 million. Unique process of knowledge transfer across borders and sectors. There was a new center of excellence with new partners on this particular field for catalysts. High-level training was given, and the company grew with jobs and can now attract private money to grow. So there's a lot of value coming out of that €1 million. Okay, next example. Again, starting with a mobility grant, but in this case, one single scientist. A thematic international cluster started with a very small project. Small in this case was €500,000 for 4 years for one scientist. What happened was that there was a top specialist in HIV vaccine research, and one of the proposals I demonstrated is from her. And she had been working for 17 years at National Institute of Health in the US, where I worked for 5 years as well. I had my own research group there. And she called me up one day and said, "Frank, please help me." And this was in the Bush area. "I hate the States. I want to go back to my home country, Hungary. Can you help? Because after 17 years, I don't know anybody in Hungary anymore." So I proposed to her, why don't we write a Marie Curie chair project? Those are special grants to bring top specialists back to Europe. Give them a reasonable budget to start a university group and pay for their salaries. Now, we could have stopped there, but she brought her own network from America and from other countries in Europe, people she knew from HIV vaccine. She brought that with her. We established a cluster of a number of universities and hospitals, and then applied for more money. And to give a long story short, actually, by designing the cluster, which I will show in the next slide, together we were able to ask for €8 million for structural funds, for more EU grants, and to set up a company. So we just used her network. And of course, there were some ingredients of success. She was working at the top university or institute in the US. She's a woman and going to Hungary. That's a very special situation. And on top of that, working on HIV vaccine, which is an important social problem. And she had skills to set up a spin-off company. So there were all the ingredients of the cake here to build a success story. And she actually had a lot of effort to bring all these little pieces of the puzzle together. I helped her in the first 2.5 years to set this up. And we had this cluster, which was Hungary-based, but with participants in Sweden and France and Italy and in Germany as well. So we had university teams, and you can follow this on this website here, university teams in different application areas using the same vaccine delivery technology. It's DNA delivered in a special way through the skin to the immune system. And you can use that in the first instance, like we did here for HIV, but the same technology can also be used for other vaccines. Now, once this path has been set up, you can use the same technology and for other vaccines much faster, much more efficacious. You set up a virtual company, if you like, with academic input, industry, manufacturing, testing with hospitals, and regulatory expertise, how to take the next steps. So it took a few years to set this up, but now there's much more money flowing in. And you can actually bring knowledge all the way to patients. So I'm not involved anymore, but it's a good way to grow from just small initial idea with a vision, bringing people together. So that is the value coming out. Efficiency, capacity, public money, and company growth, and private money. Everybody benefits here. I'm not saying this is easy. You need good management to bring the people together, but it can be done. And I will show you in another example here that it can be done with non-European partners too. This is a project that, as a result of workshops that I gave in Mexico, a clinical group in Mexico came to me and they said, look, we have this problem where you have pre-birth death. Many children are dying already, either in the womb or in the first 2 weeks after birth. And we can only address the problem with the women that are pregnant in the last quarter or semester of their pregnancy by echography. But we have no idea how to diagnose early on and already zoom in on those mothers that are high risk. That would be very valuable. Now, in Europe, we have this problem, of course, as well, but not to the extent of Mexico. The interesting thing that we found is that if you want to do this on a large scale, look for biomarkers, do lots of proteome and genetic analysis, etc., you need sufficient numbers of patients, and we needed about, 7 hospitals in Europe to bring together sufficient numbers of patients and to do all the analysis. We're talking about 8,000 patients here, so it's a fairly large project. That one hospital in Mexico, in Monterrey, alone had 3,000 patients that fitted the profile. So just one hospital in Mexico had enough, equal the number of patients as the whole hospitals in Europe. Why? Because this occurred much more frequently, 10 times more frequently in Mexico than in Europe. Nobody knows why, but the population is different, or the environment is different, or the mothers are treated differently. I have no idea. Now, the benefit is, of course, scientifically, medically, you can find markers, you can compare populations from Europe with Mexico. You could do the same in Africa and see whether here in Africa it's a less problem or a more problem. And you can compare medical practices. But there's also a private element in this project, because there was a Spanish company who could do the screening and the monitoring in a very cheap way. They had a way to have the machines and chips and have field tests that are very cheap. And while building up that capacity of the company in Spain, they transferred the knowledge to a new company in Mexico that would address the Mexican market. So there are jobs in Mexico, and there's a high-tech company in Monterrey now doing this. That is value too. And then, of course, the clinical studies for both sides. So the project is ongoing, and I don't know the result yet. But it's just to give a glimpse that you can work with non-European partners and even markets and do business there. This is the company I was involved in. We started in 1995 actually with the founder, and in 1998 I joined the company when we were 28 people. I came with an academic background into a director's research position and helped the company to grow together with the rest of the team, where we used knowledge in HIV, which was protected with a patent, to look for drugs, and this is the name of the company. We developed drugs for HIV/AIDS in a very special way, in a way that was faster and more efficient than the big pharma companies could do at that moment in time. So as a small company, we had something valuable. Because it was highly research intensive, we asked for national grants and international grants. We had grants from the European Commission, from the Flemish government, from the WHO for HIV. And we were able to grow the company then because we had the patents, we had a unique concept and public money. We could talk to private investors to pour in more money. And you're talking about leverage here, because in total, we grew the company to 250 people in these years with using 12 million euro public money and a good plan, we created an exit. We sold the company to Johnson & Johnson for 500 million in 2002. So you create a huge leverage if you have the right ingredients there. And the private investors would only invest in the company because we had all the elements there. Then they thought, okay, the risk is not so high, and let's be part of a success game. Now, I opted out of the company when we transferred to Johnson & Johnson, so a few months later I started my own company here. My first contract was back with Johnson & Johnson because they still needed me for some tasks. But in the meantime, within Johnson & Johnson, the company has grown to 670 people, and 2 blockbuster drugs are on the market. One of them is selling a billion euro per year. So Johnson & Johnson made a fantastic return on investment too. Have a look at Tibutec Verco website. That is the HIV center for Johnson & Johnson in Belgium. Last example, which may be closer to those who are working in agriculture and energy. This is an example of building something in global sustainable energy on a global basis. It's a large biofuel project, and this is a growing thing. We started a few years ago, and now it's becoming larger slowly. So it took a slow start. Again, one of the workshops I gave in Mexico ignited this idea. I gave a workshop at the Research Institute in Mexico, one of the 2 there. One is Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, the largest university in Mexico, and the other one is an agricultural research institute. They had found that jatropha oil plants, giving a lot of fruit, very rich in oil, but they're indigenous to Mexico. They grow everywhere. They may even grow here in Cameroon, but not in Europe. But in subtropical and tropical countries they grow. And they're very good for rich oil that can be used for biofuel and biodiesel. However, the current species that have been distributed over the centuries to places like Southern Africa, India, Brazil, they all derive just from 1 or 2 or 3 subspecies. And they have some very serious drawbacks. The problem is that they're toxic, they're difficult to cultivate, they don't give fruits in a regular basis, it's very variable, etc. So economically they're not fantastic, but they show great promise. Now the interesting thing is that this research institute had found that in Mexico there are more than 300 different subspecies of jatropha, all with different characteristics. And they're building a research platform to characterize these plants, to show exactly what they do, how they are cultivated, where they are growing, and how they can be used. And they match this with a number of universities in the Netherlands, Wageningen University, for example, and Leiden, and a research institute in Austria, to do very high-tech analysis. So it's not just looking at the plant, but also analyzing genomes, proteomes, agricultural principles. And all of that is done at a research site. Then we have a pilot plant in Mozambique, and CSIR in South Africa is involved with the industrial processes of squeezing the oil down there out of the plants in an efficient way. But the market is not in South Africa, the market is not in Europe, the market is not even in Brazil where they grow, because Brazil is more interested in bioethanol and not in biodiesel. That's a political decision. I found that the market is really in India. So now what I'm doing since a few weeks, 2 weeks ago I was in India. I talked to the guys in India and talked about the business case. And maybe we can transfer the knowledge from Mexico, plus Europe, and the pilot plant here in Africa to the market in India. And that is my challenge. And in the next few slides I will show how we do this. So we start with a global challenge that affects us all for renewable energy that can grow in plants and can be used. Biofuels is one of those solutions, not the only one. We know it works because some of the biofuels has been used in trains, cars, and airplanes already. So we know in principle that the idea is feasible. But the current have serious drawbacks, and the toxicity and variable yields are really the main thing. The toxicity is not to be underestimated because some of the compounds in these oils, they cause cancer in the long term. Really, really, really toxic. Unfortunately, most of the people working with these are engineers and not health scientists, so they're not aware of the problem there. And then, of course, we need to know how to cultivate, how to water. They can grow on arid land, so they do not compete with the food chain. And that is another policy argument that is very important. But you still need to calculate whether it's economically viable. It's not just the research in the lab that is important. You need to calculate whether it's feasible economically too. The whole value chain needs to be connected. And that's my role there, to bring these pieces of the puzzle together again. Sorry if I'm repeating, but I still find that the most useful example. So we have a research consortium, we have a group of SMEs, and they do laboratory work, of course, but we also have the agricultural knowledge that need to be brought in, the industrial knowledge, how to process, how to ferment, how to bring and distribute to logistics, and some test cases for quality control. And the society and ethical issues. As I said, ethical issues are very important here. In this case, in India, it's even beyond ethical, but there's also social issues about land use. Are you going to large plantations where you deal with large corporations, or are you going to distributed small farms where you can help the local farmers to produce their own oil without any distribution? That is a business model that needs to be thought out up front. See, that is about sustainable development in research and development as well. So we need all these, each in their own element. And some of the discussions, like big plantations versus small ownership, need to be discussed with the researchers, because you might select different plant species for different purposes. So opening up communication there. That is the value created, hopefully. We link clearly to the Millennium Development Goals and to South-South cooperation, because in this case the market is there, Europe is only the bridge builder. And I'm very happy to do that, and it's an ongoing thing. Please come back in a few years and then we'll see whether it works or not. And then I would like to conclude here, because we're running over time, with a few slides just for you to reflect on later. Think of the impact. Think of the focus and the business model, even at the stage of research. If you do that, then you make a much stronger case for your funding. And well, these are questions rather internally. How do you link that to the strategy? And with that, thank you very much for bearing with me for a long story. But everything has been recorded, and you will get both the recording as well as the presentations, slides yourself, so you can review the workshop again and then ask further questions if you like. And thank you very much. Questions? Questions, comments? Yes, please. Yes.
Merci. Je suis Pierre Fandiou. J'ai un commentaire et 3 questions. Le commentaire, c'est que cette partie est véritablement...
Tu peux entreprendre de prendre des notes.
Pardon? Ah, d'accord.
Merci beaucoup, vas-y.
Et voilà, merci. Donc, je m'appelle Pierre Fandiou, au département de français de l'Université de Bouya. Je disais que j'ai une question, non, j'ai un commentaire et 3 questions. Mon commentaire, c'est que cette partie, c'est véritablement celle qu'il ne fallait pas manquer. Et si on peut exprimer un regret, c'est celui qui suit. On aurait souhaité que le maximum de chercheurs, jeunes et moins jeunes, soient associés à cette séance, parce qu'en fait, elle apporte des réponses précises, parfois très très précises, à des problèmes quotidiens auxquels nous faisons face tous les jours. Je pense bien les plus anciens et les jeunes aussi. Ma question donc, mes questions, la première, c'est qu'il se trouve une remarque qui me paraît courir à travers être voilà pour toute la présentation, c'est que les humanités me semblent complètement ignorées par ces agences de financement-là. Complètement. J'ai fait quelques recherches à gauche, à droite, et il se trouve que très peu, vraiment très peu, d'agences de financement s'intéressent aux humanités. Et en plus, 99% sont en général en anglais. Alors la question, est-ce que ces pourcentages qui me font peur sont vrais? Et si c'est le cas, qu'est-ce que nous pourrions faire, nous, francophones, nous, qui travaillons dans les humanités, pour être moins marginalisés?
Si je peux répondre à la première question. Je vais répondre en anglais si vous voulez. No, certainly not. Actually, to respond to the question about the documentation, yes, 85%, 90% is in English, because English is still the most common language used in science and economic affairs. It may not be in politics and local, but at the international scale, English is the common language used. That does not mean that you have to communicate in English, but the documentation will be in English, yes. Secondly, humanities are certainly not marginalized. No, on the contrary. First of all, there are programs that I did not zoom in because it's not really my field, but there are programs under social sciences and humanities that are specifically funded by the framework program. So just have a look at one of those themes. Second, you can do humanities research under the People's Program, where you exchange people and design your own research topic. So it's completely free there, which research area you would like to investigate, as long as you exchange people. Thirdly, in the examples I gave here, especially the last one, you will see that humanities are extremely important in the implementation of research projects. So you will need humanity and social anthropological research to know which farmers to choose, how to talk to them, which farm agricultural principles are accepted and which are not, how to transfer and educate people, how to document practices in different countries. All of that is necessary and has nothing to do with the laboratory research. So I would highly encourage you to be partner in these projects and bring in your own expertise there. And then it may not be called a humanities project, it may be called a biofuel project, but the humanities are extremely important in those. And if you use your imagination there, you will see that many research projects require the humanities for dissemination and implementation and training. And definitely you can be very valuable there. No, far from being marginalized.
D'accord. Merci. J'ai encore deux questions, s'il vous plaît. La deuxième, c'est un problème auquel nous faisons face presque tous les jours, pas seulement au niveau international, mais au niveau local. En général, quand on compétit à un appel à projet, très souvent, évidemment on échoue, mais le problème c'est qu'on ne sait pas quelle est la faiblesse de nos projets. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, les organisations, les organismes de financement, y compris à l'université, très souvent, quand on vous refuse la bourse ou bien le financement, on ne vous dit pas quelle était la faiblesse de votre, de votre projet. Et du coup, le découragement vient très vite parce qu'on ne sait pas si on est nul ou alors c'est parce que, je ne sais pas, voilà les difficultés. Est-ce que vous pourriez peut-être nous dire, peut-être nous donner 2 ou 3 recettes éventuellement
Je voudrais répondre immédiatement, oui. The European Commission at least gives you an evaluation report which is quite detailed. And I can give you, if time permits, an example of this, the reports, but they really justify exactly why they give you a high or a low score. So yes, there is a good practice, fortunately. But as we heard yesterday and the day before, many funding agencies, they give no response at all. Second thing is that within the BRIMI 4AC project, we are a partner and there are other partners who are knowledgeable to help you to pre-evaluate before you submit. So feel free, if you have a proposal that is halfway ready, but at least a few weeks, a month before the deadline, send it to us or to the most knowledgeable partners in our project. They can give you feedback and see exactly where are the weak points, and you still have time to improve. And that would be very valuable for help those consortia that are ready to submit. So I highly encourage you to do that.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, ma dernière question, pour ne pas parler tout seul. Voilà, elle a trait à la propriété intellectuelle. C'est un vrai problème, peut-être un peu plus ici chez nous qu'en Occident, parce que il se trouve que la plupart du temps, nos inventions, les inventions du Sud, sont entre guillemets pillées par le Nord. Et je le dis parce que sans avoir été le meilleur de tous, à mon âge, j'ai 6 articles qui ont été publiés et qui ont été récupérés par un site français dont j'ai les références que je peux donner tout à l'heure, qui les vendent sur Internet. Je ne suis même pas au courant. C'est un collègue qui m'a dit pour la première fois que tel article, on ne peut pas l'avoir parce qu'il faut l'acheter sur Internet. Je ne suis pas informé. L'éditeur de la revue n'est pas informé. 4 de ces articles-là ont été publiés dans des revues américaines, c'est-à-dire sur papier, tandis que 2 autres ont été publiés dans des revues sur Internet, et dans l'un et l'autre cas, j'ai les droits. Donc, je ne sais pas si vous pouvez nous conseiller, est-ce que vous pouvez nous conseiller comment faire pour défendre ces droits-là, parce que c'est une violation.
Yes, I fully understand and appreciate, sympathize with you. I'm not the right expert to ask you there. I don't have a solution. I have to be very honest, really, because it depends on your financial and legal capacity to follow suit, to call them to court, threaten them, and follow and take them up to their liabilities. I can give you one example, which is rather extreme. University of California, very rich, wide, big campus-wide organ system of universities in California and the US. They had a patent on a gene for an enzyme. This is years ago. I will not go into the details, but the professor now lives in Belgium. That's why I know the story. The patent was paid and deposited and pursued by the University of California. They got it awarded and granted. Genzyme, big biotech company now, actually used that patent without paying any royalties, no contracts, no negotiations. They completely forgot, on purpose, the University of California. And they were developing their product, and they're now selling this, and this is multi-billion-dollar market. So there's a huge amount of money at stake. And they bully handled the university knowledge transfer office, which was very professional. And of course, the university took Genzyme to court. They failed on the first instance. They went to a higher court case. They won a court case, and then they actually had to try to force down the company to pay up, and in return to pay on the royalties that were initially negotiated. So everything was based on contracts, and they had all the rights. The company simply refused. Now finally, when they actually got public on the stock market, then they had a handle, and they made a huge campaign, and finally they settled for about 400 million euros. But it took them almost 10 years of court action, and they had to invest 80 or 90 million euro legal cases before to get the 400 million, with no, and they had the money to pay. Now, unfortunately, most universities, and certainly not individuals like you, have that money to pay. So I sympathize there that it's extremely difficult to do this. And maybe John has an idea. Maybe anybody else in the yes, we'll come back to you. Can maybe the microphone for a second to somebody who has an idea.
I was going to say something about funding humanities research.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I would like to just to give one example for the response to help this young man. Anybody has an idea? Because I really think it. Question in the center, but no solutions.
Excuse me.
Come back.
I don't know if this is directly applicable, but there are some international agencies which buy articles and then they sell them. I know of Sabinet in Southern Africa, but many of you will know of Excelvia Excelvia is a company that buys published documents already. And then they sell them. So the question I was trying to give is that as authors, we have the copyright to what we publish. We have to be careful not to, because they'll buy this for a fee and make much more money. I'm not sure if this is what has happened in this particular case. I was just questioning that let us be careful not to sell our rights in that manner, because in the majority of cases, we lose out.
Yeah. Follow up the liability in legal cases is very difficult. I am aware of one organization, and maybe John knows more, but there seems to be a non-profit organization of intellectual property specialists from developing countries that help pro bono. I have somewhere in my computer a link, so I promise you I will look it up and send it to you later if you leave the email. Or if I leave my business cards here, if you could send me an email as a reminder, then I will send it up to you later. To you, John.
My comment it relates to the intellectual property arrangements, but not to that particular case. I would personally say that the universities have to be very realistic, and your case illustrates that, Frank, about what they can do and what they can't do. And one strategy that the universities in Cameroon or the region generally could take is to view intellectual property protection and exploitation as a shared activity, an activity where there is perhaps one office which will deal with intellectual property for the universities generally, because many universities, certainly in Europe and America, have found that having set up large intellectual property offices, that they just don't have the volume of work and of revenue to make it viable. Now that's great if you take your view, Frank, that technology transfer is not just about making money, but you still have to have the flow of ideas. And when I was involved in this field in the UK, I was at a small university which had exactly this problem. It did not have the flow of intellectual property to make a significant in-house operation viable. And at that time, there was an organization, a government-funded organization at that time, called the British Technology Group, which has since been spun off and privatized. But at that time, it offered our university an arrangement whereby it would come and look free of charge and evaluate any idea that we had, and it was entirely our choice whether we asked them in or not. If they thought that the idea was worthwhile and that there was some potential intellectual property, they would undertake all the legal costs, all the patenting costs, and all the defense costs, if it came to that, of the arrangement. They would assume ownership of the intellectual property. We would get 40% of the revenue, of the gross revenue, from any income. Now, many universities, larger universities, did not like that arrangement. From my point of view, at a small university, I thought it was an excellent deal. And, you know, people have different views on this. But from my point of view, it gave us an income from intellectual property without any risk in terms of patenting. And Frank, you can tell us the figures. Even material that gets patented, only 1% or 2% or 3% actually leads to revenue. Yes. We didn't have to invest in patent agents. We didn't have to invest in specialist in-house staff. And yet we got 40% of the revenue. I thought that was a great deal myself. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the view of all my colleagues. But I think the point I'm making generally is that universities need to be realistic. And I would, in terms of Cameroon universities, I think this is an issue that you should perhaps be talking to government about. and saying that government ought to invest in a unit, not the individual universities, that can help individual cases like yours.
Thank you, John. Maybe I can add here. Yesterday I presented different models for research management and technology transfer offices. You're describing the one model that I said completely outsourced private, which is prevalent in the UK and in Germany. It works very well, in my view, for engineering research institutes, for technical products. These are easier, and also for ICT solutions perhaps, easier to transfer and license, and they generate income in a shorter term. They may not work very well in all faculties. So you could opt for a mixed model, where you can actually share sources for certain faculties and certain products in this model and have a lighter model in-house for the other faculties. And what I said yesterday about knowledge transfer offices, please understand me correctly. I use the office in the term of a definition of function. So it could be one person, a staff member who has done this before once and just advises other colleagues in the first instance, and then slowly, as needed, develop into a separate function and maybe even an office. But at least start with one person who is the local expert, who has done it once, and then help and start from there. Okay. Yes. Yes, exactly. Let us go around. You had one question, and then Vice Chancellor, where are you sitting?
Thank you very much. I would just, before I ask my question, I'd just like to make a remark that your presentation has been very enriching, and there are many of us who have been turning around these things, not knowing some of the implications. Well, my question, very short one. If you have a consortium and you have a number of work packages, with different partners, and I remember in one of the slides you showed how if a partner opted out, the reaction of the funding body, because that's where you have now, if the partner opts out,
yeah.
And what happens generally? Thank you.
Generally, would be hard to say, but I know a few specific cases. In this particular case, the European Commission project officer, because they need to decide, decided not to kill the project, but actually invite the consortium in for 6 months to find a replacement partner. If there is a case that the project officer is not convinced that the consortium has the capacity to find and replace, because they're fighting, because there is no other replacement partner or other reasons, they may have the discretion to kill the consortium and pick the next project from the reserve list. But they will always discuss this with the coordinator. It's not a closed door there. It is an open dialogue there. And it really depends a bit on the project officer. Some project officers give much more freedom than others, and it depends on their experience. The junior members usually are more scared and they take more administrative, rigid decisions, while the more senior project officers have experience, give guidance, and give suggestions in a little bit more time. But there's not a standard process there. But, okay. There was another question over there. Microphone, please.
First of all, I want to thank you for the presentation since yesterday, today, which have been real eye-openers. I think I join my voice to those of others who appreciated the presentation. I just wanted to address this issue of funding humanities research. In the FP7 framework, there's a section, unless I'm making a mistake, for heritage research, which concerns principally the humanities, including plastic and audiovisual arts. I mean, humanities in the purest sense of it. history, sociology, philosophy, literature, and so on. And there's big money for it too. But the problem with, I'm talking from outside, is that the tradition in the humanities is that either I did it or you did it. This idea of collaborating, co-publishing, doing work together like biologists or medical people or engineers would do, it's not in the tradition of the humanities. We have not yet seen a poem that was composed by two poets, for instance. It's just not in their tradition. And then the funding bodies are just transposing the paradigms from biomedical and engineering research into the humanities. So there's some thinking has to go on there, and funding for humanities has to be adapted to the traditions of that area of human activity, which is also very important. That's just one comment. The comment I want to make also is about what happens when partners drop out. Okay, he's given the institutional answer, but what of you who won the grant? What can you do? We've experienced that here, even with small projects of $100,000 or $170,000 or something like that. When everything was set, and one of the partners wrote us a Dear John letter and said, well, you know, I really think you are great people to work with, but it's such that we cannot continue. And that person was key in the chain of events. And we had just a month to replace and so on, because we could not send back the money from University of Boya to the funding agency. So there is no one size solution for it, but I think one strategy can be that if we are already working in a network, when you have that catastrophe, it will, or that threat, it will be easier to find a partner to replace. But if you are working always alone, because you are too afraid to lose priority over your ideas, then when you get stuck, the money will go back. That's it.
Thank you for that comment. Indeed, the risk is much higher if you work alone. I fully appreciate that. And I also appreciate that in the humanities, more people are used to work alone, not in isolation, but within their own environment. I can only give one example, or a suggestion rather. If you have a project where you have multiple partners in Europe and you have one institute here that participates, and the institute is not capable or not willing to participate, but the individual researcher would like still to participate, it's possible to agree on a personal basis a contract with one of the other partners to exchange, and then their budget will encompass the cost for this one project. So that, in that case, the principal investigator individually negotiate with one of the other partners to be part of their team on a secondment basis or on an individual basis with the subcontract. That's still possible. And theoretically, it's possible under the financial guidelines that a legal entity as a person signs the contracts. That is possible, but it's rare, and usually it occurs only under the mobility Marie Curie programs, not under the large research projects. But for all practical purposes, I would suggest the principal investigator negotiates with one of the other partners to be partner of their budget and part of their, either as a subcontractor or as a third party. There is something like called a legal term, third party. And that's somebody who's working outside the campus, but under the responsibility of the other partner. So physically it's possible, and contractually it's possible, but it is a matter of negotiation with the other partners. Thank you. One other question here. Somebody has the microphone.
Thank you very much. I would like, please, some more enlightenment on the aspect of, well, you've already shown us how to look for partners with information on web links. And so my difficulty is, it seems as if after having successfully located a partner and maybe working out how you participate in this project, it's the institution that has to sign the contract, like your university, not you as an individual. Which brings me to the point that it has become extremely necessary that all of us researchers in the university need to be well informed on the setup of the university to know who is going to manage what, because if the university signs, that means when the project takes off, the university also manages the budget. And I can only speak for myself because I don't yet understand our own system. I don't know. You cannot explain that, but maybe you can give some recommendations.
Maybe you should talk to your Foba. Dr. Foba knows. That's why she's here. She's there to help you.
Because that's a gray area for us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm not of the University of Buea, but if you have some recommendations on how the university can facilitate these things and make researchers more aware of the structure and how to go about these things, so that when you're negotiating, you know who to also, how it's going to get on when the project actually takes off.
There are two elements. One is that find the equivalent of Dr. Foba in your university. If not, grill your vice-chancellor to implement such a function. Second, no, that's for love. But secondly, finding partners without any central help. We have in the RIMI for AC project quite a number of universities and partners like the ACU and my company can help if you can describe in an email exactly what you're doing and what you're looking for in terms of a partner. If you describe that in a one page, and I can leave a template with Dr. Foba here to be distributed to everybody, a one page from what is your ID, what can you bring into the project ID, and what are you seeking for in a partner as missing pieces. That such a form can be distributed through our networks in other universities. I have access to another project in Europe where we can spread this out through all the national contact points in all 27 member states in Europe. It will take time, and there's no guarantee you get a response, but at least you have a very wide network to fish in. So then it's up to you to describe exactly what you can offer and what you're looking for in a partner. And there are means to search partners that way too. So I will leave another tool with Dr. Foba. If you leave your email address with her, she can get you access to those tools too. And if the website of the project will be more active, you will find more tools in due time later this year as well. Yeah. Further, ladies first, may I?
Yeah, it's just a comment for Remy for AC, as coordinated by Dr. Foba. I think she's raising some important communication gap within the university structure. The hope is that with all of these activities coming up now, I think it's time that the university structures in the different universities that is in charge of research should really put out their structure, their objectives, and what is their support to different staff. I think that is what is coming up, and I think it's a very important element which they should address in the, what do you call it, consortium, whatever. Okay, thank you.
That's good, thank you. There was a question here, please.
Thank you. When you made a comment much earlier this morning that a partner failed to sign his own section for the project.
His forms, yes.
And you lost. I felt really guilty because this is a problem. In as much as we in the third world have to look for partners who end up being the coordinators and who should be in Europe, we don't have the opportunity of becoming coordinators. And these coordinators in Europe usually have their own goals, and they look on us to support them, to enable them win the grants. Because last year, a SIGA grant proposal was identified by a group from Sweden over the net and contacted by email and sent forms to fill. But I wrote back to ask for the project proposal and my role. And they phoned me to say I should just fill the forms and send. Mm-hmm. And I said on the phone that my institution will have to sign the forms. I can't sign the forms because I don't even have the proposal. I have not seen the objectives, and I have not seen the role I was going to play. We're 3 countries. Myself, somebody from Kenya, and another one from Ethiopia. They were writing to all of us at the same time. And right to the last minute of submission, these guys wanted me to sign this form and send my email, which I still refuse to do. So when you made that point, I thought I was the one, because that project, incidentally, was equally 6 million euros. Mm-hmm. What do you say about that? I mean,
that's another example.
It scares me off, because now I won't even want to look for a coordinator, because I think they have something up their sleeve when they want to look for us. Maybe to use us. Is that a situation? Thank you.
I feel with you. I hope that with the expose I gave here, at least you know why it's so important to fill in these forms. And nowadays it's easier because all of these are electronically. So no signatures are needed in the proposal submission. You only need to notify your executive management that you are going about to propose and that you are hoping to get a proposal. If that would be successful, if that case, the university would be willing to send forms and sign contracts. So it's good practice to inform executive management. If there's any reason why a university would object to sign contracts, there's no point in going through the proposal writing. But if the university says, well, just in case you would be successful, we are willing to support, then that's fine. There is no signature needed in the submission process. Only during the negotiation, then it becomes serious and you need a commitment from the university. What you highlight here is a communication problem between the coordinator and yourself, that the coordinator expected things from you that you did not know you needed to fill in. And the coordinator, from his role, is probably a bit nervous because he is dealing with so many other partners and chasing bits and pieces of information and many different documents and maybe even another project on hand as well. So they have very little time to chase partners. If they don't respond the first time, they forget about it. So it's really a process where both parties need to know what is expected. And I usually start when we have the composition of a consortium 80% ready. I send around, if I'm the coordinator, I send around the forms and I make sure that there is a project manager or an assistant chasing all the partners so that we, at least a week of 2 or 3 before the deadline, we have all the forms signed. Then you can concentrate on the last little typing and reviewing of the proposal, but at least you don't have to chase people anymore. Suppose somebody becomes sick. Suppose somebody is on vacation, suppose the computer breaks down. You cannot do that at the last moment anymore. So I usually start with the administration forms the moment you have a good part of the consortium cleared out. And I usually, nowadays, with the unique registration facility, you can do that way before you submit any proposal. There's no need to wait until you have a project ID. You can already now, without any proposal submitting, you can register your university already. And once that is done, all the information is there with the Commission already. That takes away some of the urgency there. But yes, I've seen proposals failing here, and that is an extreme pity, because sometimes the IDs and the rest of the proposals are very, very valuable. And yeah, it's a trust basis between the different partners too. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Thank you. I equally add my voice to those who have congratulated you for the very enriching presentation. I belong to the human sciences, and I was just thinking that I'm out of it because of this idea, with whom am I going to build a research team and start asking for funding. But in my capacity here as representing the Ministry of Scientific Research and Innovation, I was just wondering, you have been talking about research in the university, research teams in the university. Can the research institutes, because under MINRESI we have about 7-8 of them, can they apply for this? Okay.
Even a ministry as a legal entity could be a partner. If they have a partner in policy research, for example, in debates, yes. Any legal entity can be a partner.
Okay, thank you.
So also NGOs, associations, any type of legal entity. Okay, I see that people are eager for lunch. One final question. One final question. All the way at the back, please.
Well, I also congratulate you for the presentation, but I wanted to comment and to ask a question on financial reporting, because in a research done among African universities, one of the major problems was that when it came to financial reporting, to make the returns for audit, either they were late or sometimes the funders rejected them, and it created a problem in terms of releasing subsequent funds. And in some cases also, some funders would not allow you to employ properly a project accountant, like is done in construction and in road projects. So what is your experience in that, in terms of auditors rejecting some certain financial reports, and therefore delaying the further disbursement of funds?
Yes, it does happen, indeed. I mean, it happened to my company too, on minor expenses, where in my company, in that case, even though it's extremely small, we're less than 10 people, just 2 management partners, this is a very, very small company. We have an externalized accounting department who accounts all the things, but the accountant is not knowledgeable about project accounting. So he accounts the full accounting of the entire enterprise. Then we have one of our management partners is responsible for the financial reporting on the project itself. So we have multiple projects running in parallel, and for this RIMI 4AC project, for example, she is responsible to follow all the expenses and put all the copies in a separate folder, as I said this morning. The auditor that we have is another auditing accounting company coming from Louvain, and they just look at that one folder, whether all the expenses were reported correctly. And there are always discussions about minor details. Flight tickets that were not reported in the accounting system and other things. Expenses that were not accepted because they were not included in the accounting system, they're forgotten. So that is the value of having an auditor. Unfortunately, you do need an auditor that is knowledgeable about the rules of the funding agency, as you well point out. And in our case, fortunately, we found an auditor that is very knowledgeable and they can do it, and they really give suggestions to improve the accounting system in our case. But I've met a lot of partners in universities where the auditor is a financial officer inside, and they're not even interested in the funding agency rules. They are used to regular accounting. So there's an eternal debate about eligibility, etc. And the only thing I can say here, apart from, yes, it happens, and sometimes we do lose costs because they're not accepted by the auditor. The only acceptance here is really think ahead when you build your budget and look at the financial rules of that funding agency up front. Build them into the template that I gave you, and that avoids a lot of discussion later. Secondly, for the European Commission, on the Cordis website, you will find a link to the financial guidelines that are used by the European Commission. The auditor should read those financial guidelines because they're very explicit. They tell you exactly what is eligible and what is not. And that is the basis for the negotiation. But yeah. Thank you for the contribution, but because that is a real practical thing, and every single funding agency will have their own rules. I've been involved in a development capacity building project where it was allowed to buy cars to transport into field studies, where you could buy construction material to build an extension to a hospital facility, for example. But under the research projects of the FP7, that is not eligible. You can only pay for the research expenses, but not for buildings. So yes, you have to look up that when you construct your budget. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing all that with you and for the active participation of you in the last session. And I wish you all the luck with the projects, and let's keep in touch through Dr. Foba or directly. I leave my business cards here for you to take with me. Thank you very much.